Good day and welcome back to another DBZ Dokkan battle video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the top or my best 5 defensive abilities in DBZ Dokkan battle. So these are going to be specifically abilities that activate when a unit is hit or when they receive a super attack, more so than abilities that will activate during a turn, for example health recovery, which is more a utility based kind of ability. So if something's not here, it might be because it'd be under utility. But the number one defensive mechanic in Dokkan is Guard. Guard is by far and away the most potent defensive mechanic overall, and there's a reason why. Guard basically acts as a huge modifier to the damage that you take from your units. It reduces not only the type, so it provides a type advantage, but it also reduces the class advantage. So for example, any modifiers that superclass enemies would gain against extreme class are also removed. This is a reason why Guard is usually conditional. Very few units will have outright Guard. Most of the units that do age incredibly well and last for an incredibly long time in Dokkan because of this. So if I take a look and you look at Gohan, for example, Gohan is a Guard-based unit, very much one of the ones that kind of people blame for Guard not being a potent skill anymore. But Guard units come out very few times, and most of them are some of the best units in the game, especially defensively. How Guard works is basically Guard will apply to the damage that is taken from an attack. So for example, if I have 100k defense, and I get hit by a 200k super and I have Guard active, I will only be receiving just under half of that. It's basically a 55% reduction to the damage that you receive from the attack. So for example, if I were to receive 62,000 damage from an attack, I will instead be receiving 31,000. Because this occurs after the actual damage calculation, it can be pretty potent. It also works quite effectively against super attacks, because if a super attack were to hit me and do 500k damage as it would to a type neutral unit, I instead will be taking much less dramatically. It's a very flat calculation, so it kind of exists pretty much the same effect on both normal attacks and on both super attacks. The next one, or the second most important, is going to be Evasion. Now, between Evasion and damage reduction, people like to pick their poison. Personally, Evasion is something I feel works much more effectively in the long term of the game. There's a reason why Evasion gets disabled in a lot of events, and I'm not saying go full Evasion builds or anything. I think that's a bit memey. Yes, it can work, but I don't really support it. But units with natural levels of evasion, especially units that have natural levels of evasion above 50%, or 50% and above, generally speaking tend to do quite well. And the reason for this is evasion acts as a full counter to all forms of damage. If you can evade the attack, you will never take damage from it. This is quite apparent, obviously. So whereas in case with damage reduction, most units will take reduced damage, and with Guard, units will take reduced damage, there's still a chance that given the other factors involved, you might still take a significant component of damage. Whereas with evasion, it's completely removed. The thing is, obviously, it is entirely RNG dependent, whereas Guard and damage reduction are more stable confluences. I find that evasion is kind of that chaotic good mechanic. It's one of those mechanics that when you need it to, it sometimes feels like it doesn't kick in. But generally, units that have 50% or above are very great defensive units. And there's a reason why Caulifla has been banned in a lot of events, and there's a reason why a lot of events will disable evasion. Because simply units like Tech Caulifla exist, and units like MUI Goku exist, units that can pretty much dodge almost everything thrown their way. And because of this, you will see evasion get banned from time to time, because it can trivialize a lot of content. Evasion is incredibly powerful. That ability to completely remove the damage calculation is incredibly potent. So yes, evasion for me is the second most important, or the second most impactful defensive ability in the game, and closely followed behind is damage reduction. Now damage reduction is very good, But damage reduction is interesting in how it applies into the calculation of how damage is taken. So damage reduction occurs before the defensive calculation. So for example, basically when you look at damage or damage calculations, damage reduction occurs to the opponent's attack stat. So if for example an opponent has a 200,000 attack stat and I have damage reduction of 40%, that 200k attack stat will reduce to 120 and then it will be applied to my defense that I have that's existing. Because of this, damage reduction is very, very strong. The only thing is, damage reduction, generally speaking, has to be paired with some level of defense. If you only have 10% damage reduction, it's not notable enough, and you can feel this with units like Int LR Vegeta, where he builds up defense and damage reduction on every hit, but then it gets reset. And the fact that this gets reset is a huge hindrance to him as a unit, because by the time he gets his massive or his decent 40% damage reduction, he still takes pretty much normal damage. In some cases you don't need defense, where your damage reduction is so high that it just kicks in. For example, AGL Golden Frieza is a great example of this. His 90% damage reduction reduces even 2 million attack stats to 200k. And because of how damage reduction works, no matter how big the super attack stats work, if you have incredibly high levels of damage reduction like this unit, you tend to be more than fine. Not only that, but damage reduction is an ability that scales better with higher stats. So for example, when you have damage reduction and you have huge super attacks, damage reduction actually makes a unit hold up a lot better than raw defense or anything else, because damage reduction acts as a pseudo barrier before the defense is even taken into a calculation. So if units tank single digits from attack stats now with 90% damage reduction, chances are they're probably going to do that until the attack stats pretty much over double. So it's very, very important. The next capability after those kind of big three that we're talking about are going to be a couple interesting ones. So we're going to talk about revive skills, and then we're also going to be talking about key nullification abilities. Now, revive skills for me are the fourth most important defensive capability when you're planning a team. Having a revive, the ability to reset your entire run or to help you survive a powerful attack, is very strong. But there is two different kinds of revive skills. First you get unconditional revive skills, and then you get conditional revive skills, and then you get revive skills that affect by all of your allies, and revive skills that only affect if your enemy or yourself is destroyed by that attack. So for example, to give you how it works, if Master Roshi or any other unit in Master Roshi's turn is defeated while his condition is active, then you will revive. However, in Metal Cooler's case, Metal Cooler has an unconditional revive skill, but only he can die to the attack. Evidence of this is I had an AoE super attack kill my Buhan before it killed my Metal Cooler, and thus I wasn't able to activate the revive because the death condition only occurs when Metal Cooler is hit. So it's very important to understand how these work, but generally speaking, revive skills are very good. The only hindrance with revive skills is you can only activate one revive skill per run. So you can't run double revive leads, especially ones that need their revive to activate for pseudo other conditions like Super Saiyan Goku. You tend to actually have a bit of a problem there. Then the final one, or the last in inverted commas, or the fifth most important defensive capability that you want to be aware of, is nullification abilities. Now nullification abilities are very, very strong, and the reason why nullification abilities are so great is because they can remove certain units' super attack effects. There's two types. You get unarmed super attacks and you get key blast super attacks. Essentially, unarmed super attacks basically means that you can stop any kind of physical super attack, and key blast super attacks generally relate to any beams or blasts or kind of energy based super attacks. There's actually a third type of super attack that enemies can do called a special attack, but this is very rare and won't really matter too much. But the general consensus is that nullification abilities are very good. There's a reason why they're quite rare. There's also a reason why units usually only have a chance for it to occur. because they will zero the damage that a super attack will do to you. It's a very, very potent ability. It's also something quite new in the game, but I think for the most part it's a very, very good mechanic for units to have. It means that you can mix and match with teams, and some units will perform great in certain events where the enemy is performing only physical based attacks, and they'll be able to nullify a lot of those. Now it only applies to super attacks, so normal attacks aren't like physical or unarmed attacks that you're going to nullify. Basically it will just apply to the actual super attack the enemy performs. So it's important to understand that you can't take a unit that prevents unarmed super attacks and think he's going to stop like normal physical attacks. The unit will still have to deal with taking damage from those. But yes, but guard for me is the most potent ability in the game. I think it's quite obvious when you look at all the best aging units in the game, from Inchinemba to Tech Gohan to pretty much every LR now getting guard for the first 3 turns. It's a very potent mechanic, and there's a reason why they are trying to establish some kind of semblance with it. Units that have guard tend to age well, and they tend to remain competitive for a very long time beyond their meta. Most units tend to last a year or 2, and units with guard can sometimes last up to 3, maybe even 4 years. I still use Tech Gohan to this day, and he does fine. But that's it from me. Let me know your thoughts. Bye.